the prophets of Baal, they knew him as one who rebuilt the altar. Co-pastor talked about how they met at Mount Carmel, and Elijah said, "Okay, you go ahead and you cry out to your gods. We'll see. The God that answers by fire, that's who we'll serve." And they cried out, and they spent all day cutting themselves and hollering and screaming and doing all kinds of things. He said, "Maybe your God's asleep. Maybe he's on vacation." You know, he called them out. They saw him take the stones and build an altar. They watched him build an altar, and they watched him and they listened as he said a very short prayer. But that prayer was powerful. It was effective. It was fervent. It was earnest. It was truthful. It come from his spirit. It come out of his character. He wasn't there necessarily to show them up. What he said was that God be revealed. His prayer, his character was that God be revealed. That was the answer that he was looking for. He prayed in efforts to bring glory to God, not to bring glory to himself. So they knew him as a man who rebuilt the altar. They knew him as a man that could say a short prayer and the answer came. They knew him as a man who could speak and the fire came from heaven. We also read shortly thereafter that Elijah was empowered by God to outrun Ahab. So he was known by his accomplishment. When he said, "I hear the sound of the abundance of rain," he told his servant, "Go tell Ahab, you better get out of here, man. It's fixing flood. Go." Ahab gets his chariots and he gets started, but next thing you know, Elijah outruns him because he was empowered by God to do so. So there's lots of things that we know about Elijah. Lots of way that we come to know him. But if we go back to the verse in James, it says, Elijah was a man. Elijah was a man. Elijah was a man. He was a human, subject to like passions. In other words, he was just an ordinary man. He had the same problems every other man had. He encountered the same kind of difficulties any other man would encounter. He knew about hardship. He knew about persecution. He knew about not having enough. He knew about depending on God for everything. He was just a man. Just a man. So Elijah could identify with us, or we can identify with him in that we're human, that we experience all kinds of emotions and troubles and trials and how we deal with them. Yet the text says he prayed fervently that it would not rain, and it did not rain. What was it about Elijah? He was just a man, but he had power, for he was in relationship with God. You know, those that are in close relationship with you know you better than anybody else. Co-pastor knows pastor better than anybody else. We can sit here and say we know pastor, but she knows pastor. He knows her. You know, you may think you know, but the person that's closest to him in relationship is the one that really knows. Elijah had a relationship with God. He had to hear from God and to speak prophetically to the kings, to be advisors to the kings, to talk to the people. But he was just a man. You know, how many times do we just say, "Well, Lord knows I'm just a human. You know, I'm just human. That's all I can do. I'm just human." You know, we get in our little mode sometimes and we blame it all on being human. Elijah was human, but he also knew God. He also was a powerful man that could speak the words of God. But all too often we identify with the fearful Elijah. I want to look at 1 Kings chapter 19. All too often we identify with Elijah at this point where after Mount Carmel, after the great victory, after the fire came from heaven, after it consumed the altar, after he sees the cloud, after the rain is coming, after this great victory, what happens most often after we've had a great victory? You're on the mountaintop, but you know what's next after the mountaintop? The valley. That's what happened to Elijah. All these great things took place, yet we see him now as he comes down out of the mountain. We see something taking place with Elijah. And all too often we want to identify with this part, the weak part. But I want to challenge you today to identify with the strong part of Elijah, not the weak. But all too often we identify with the fearful Elijah. 19 and verse 1. Now Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done, how he had slain all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a message to Elijah, saying, So let the gods do to me and more so, if I make not thy life as the life of one of them by tomorrow about this time. And when he saw that, he arose and went for his life, and came to Beersheba, which belonged to Judah, and he left his servant there. And he went a day's journey into the wilderness, and came and sat down under the juniper tree, and requested for himself that he might die. He said, It's enough. I've had enough, God. Elijah said, I've just had enough. I'm tired of being chased. I'm tired of being threatened. I've done everything I know to do. I'm tired. I've had enough. Now, see, we can identify with that part of him. We all have reached that place from time to time. That's the human. I'm just a human. I'm just a man. He was not at that moment looking to God, the author and the finisher of his faith. He was saying, I'm just human. I've done all I can do. I can't take it anymore. Just a threat from a woman, the king's wife. He went a day's journey. He sat down under the juniper tree, and he requested for himself that he might die. He said, I'd be better off dead. Now, that's pretty low. This is the prophet of God that just slew 450 prophets of Baal. This is the prophet of God that just prayed and fire came down. And here he is saying, Lord, just take my life. I just take my life. The ups and downs of our life, they're no different for a prophet of God. They're no different for a pastor or a pastor's wife. They have their ups and downs too. But what we see in all of this is God was still faithful to deal with Elijah. Elijah was just being real. I've had enough. I can't take it anymore. And as he lay there and he slept under the juniper tree, behold, an angel touched him and said, Arise and eat. And he looked, and behold, there was a cake of bread on the coals, a cruse of water at his head. He ate and he drank, and he laid back down. That's just like we are sometimes. Oh, well, good. There's something to eat. Let me have a little something to eat. And lay back down. Not even to take time to say thank you. Not even taking time to realize that God was intervening in his situation. He just laid back down. And the angel of the Lord came to him again a second time and touched him. Arise and eat. This time he says, the journey is too great for thee. You're going to need this strength. God will intervene. At your lowest, he will intervene and send you the help that you need for the journey that is ahead. But we read on and we find out that Elijah went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights. In other words, his journey was going to be a fast that lay ahead of him. But this supernatural manna from heaven, this angel food, fed him. But he came to a cave now and he lodged there. The word of the Lord came to him and said, What are you doing here, Elijah? What are you doing here? You know, it's just like God knows the answer already, but he's asking Elijah. And Elijah, instead of saying why he was really there, he began on his pity party. He said, Oh, I've been so jealous to do everything for the Lord God of hosts. For the children of Israel have forsaken thy covenant. They've thrown down the altars. They've slain the prophets with the sword. I'm the only one left, and they seek to kill me. Man, he had it bad. He was in the lowest of lows. This is God talking to him, saying, Why are you here, Elijah? And all he could do is talk about his problems. We're talking about God of the universe, the God with the answers. And all Elijah could do was talk about his problems instead of saying why he was really there. He was really there because he was fearful and he was running and he was hiding You know, God's not going to do anything for us till we get real. He was giving Elijah the opportunity to get real. And Elijah had to talk about these problems. God says, go and stand at the mount before the Lord. I'm at verse 11, chapter 19, verse 11. And behold, the Lord passed by. A great and strong wind rent the mountains, break it in pieces, and the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after that, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still small voice. So it was when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And behold, the voice came to him again. What are you doing here, Elijah? Now, Elijah experienced the manifestations of God all around him. The earthquake, the fire, the wind, all these things were manifestations of God, yet he still had not tapped into God's presence. He was not discerning the voice of God until he hears this still small voice. And then he goes out and stands to the entrance of the cave, and he hears the Lord again. And again he says the same thing. I've been jealous for the Lord, because the children of Israel have forsaken thy covenant, thrown down thine altars, and slain the prophets, and they're after me too. And the Lord said, well, that's all right. Go, return thy way to the wilderness of Damascus, and when thou comest, anoint Hazael to be king over Syria. Jehu, the son of Nimshi, shalt thou anoint to be king over Israel. And Elisha, the son of Shaphat, shalt thou anoint to be a prophet in thy room. In other words, God spoke to him there in this cave, in this time of bewilderment, this time where he was doubting his own call. He was at the lowest of lowest. God brought encouragement to him by giving him yet another assignment. See, sometimes you can be at the lowest of low and think that you just might as well quit. That you just can't make a difference. That you've witnessed to your family till you're blue in your face. Or you've helped as long as you can help and you can't make a difference. You'll get a place where you're just at your lowest of lows. But God will intervene. Often it is with an assignment. I can't help but use myself for an example, because this week was already going to be a pretty full week at work, and then when the pastor asked me about speaking this morning, my first thought was, oh, what a week I've got scheduled. And then I told him, I said, well, I'm working midnights, but I believe the Lord will help me. You know, at my lowest, God said, I've got something else for you to do. At the end of my strength, God said, I've got something else for you to do. At the end of what I thought was humanly possible, God said, I got something else for you to do. And finding that place of loyalty to the call, or that faithfulness to him, you push on. This is what Elijah did. Though he had found himself at a place where he even begged to die, God gave him another assignment.